This video is about small quarter-inch drive ratchets. So to start out all my videos, I talk about what is the ideal use case for a tool like this. So for me, that's M6 and M8 bolts, which are small and low torque, 10 and 12 millimeter sockets that you want to spin down. You hold up at the top of the wrench. You don't want to swing your arm around. You just want to ratchet them down, and then you usually don't, you don't go back on the wrench to get enough torque, because even up here, that's plenty, especially for an M6, like a 10 millimeter socket. So what gave me the idea to pursue these wrenches and decide between them was getting this. This I thought would be perfect for that stuff. It is perfect. Plenty of leverage for an M6 holding it like this. You can even get an M8 with plenty of leverage holding it down here. You can choke up on the handle. It presses against your palm. It's really good for winding down. It's lightweight, but then after using it for a while, the issues came with accessing awkward angles. So if I was reaching, like for example, on the side of an engine block to get the chain tensioner, pressing the socket onto the bolt would use the flex. Reaching over the bucket seat, I would lean into the car, reach over to get to the 6 millimeter hex. Same thing, it's just a little fiddly lining it up, and it bends the head out and stuff. And then when you're doing this with it in this position, that extra handle length, you've got to kind of monitor, and it ends up being a little annoying. It's important to note with tools like this, the difference isn't significant. For most people, it doesn't matter. You can get by without these, of course. But the idea is that there'll be little annoying things like that that cumulatively will make a big difference in the experience and make it worthwhile for people who do this stuff a lot. It just makes those fiddly tasks not fiddly, and therefore enjoyable, and you've got some kind of cool piece of tech that you can think about while you work. So I thought I should get one like this. It should be shorter. I'll be holding it up on the head all the time, so I don't need this extra length, and it shouldn't have a flex head. So I got the Koken here, just, this one's better than that for that task. It still sticks out, and that's a big compromise, but it's lighter weight, it doesn't have the flex, and then the Kokens just have such superb drag that it was a tempting option. Besides that, there are pretty much no options unless you go cheaper, unless you go so cheap that the ratchet mechanism is compromised enough, the drag's high enough that it's just not worth the any form factor advantage that they may have. And they don't really have a form factor advantage. At best, it's close. But just that much worse ratchet mechanism is not a compromise I was willing to make. So it was down to these two. My initial thought was this would be better, right? Because this is the same length as your hand, and the quality is really good. And why have any different? If it's the right length, if it fits in your hand well, if the mechanism is good, there's your tool. But I ended up trying these out and comparing them, and found some things that I wasn't expecting. So reaching around to those M8s, in that position, the round head with this crazy chrome is not the most maneuverable. So the round faces of the head are a slight disadvantage versus a flat-sided head. There's plenty of leverage for an M6, but for an M8, it can be tricky. So one cool thing I found out about this is tightening down. You can use the ball end to press in your palm and get a lot of leverage for such a short lever length. But then if you're restricted to using your fingers, you've really got to crank down on it. You can, but it isn't ideal. Now this one, the end is much pointier, so I thought, is that going to be an issue using that palm technique? But even that extra centimeter changes the amount of leverage enough where you can still do that comfortably. And then using your fingers, it makes all the difference for getting that extra little bit of torque. The ratchet mechanism is basically identical. You know, this has more teeth, and the drag initially on the 80 tooth of the Stahlwille was a little bit higher, but that wasn't going to be a deal breaker for either one. And then what really pushed me over the edge in favor of the Stahlwille was the selector switch. Normally I wouldn't care about that. My criteria is just that it shouldn't be annoying, and for these tools it's less annoying than most. You know, it's always at a fingertips reach, you always have good access to it. The coke ends are kind of, people talk about how those are annoying, but especially on the non-flex, that handle goes right up to the edge, so you've got a really good action to it. It's never fiddly, even though it's tiny. This one is similar. It sticks up higher, so it's basically the same. It requires a little bit more effort, but totally not annoying. And then this one's massive, but the feedback on it is much better and the swing is more. So it has kind of an initial lock zone and then super buttery over to the other one. And so I tried reaching over and putting it in the wrong direction intentionally and trying to, like, now that I've got the socket set on the bolt, how easy is it to twist with like one of my fingers? So, you know, I don't know if you saw, I hold it like this and try to do it with my middle finger, things like that. And that pushed it over the edge in favor of this one because of the flat sides and that extra tightening ability that your fingertips give you. Now, another weird difference between these is the weight. So even though the Stahlwille is bigger, you can kind of see where I'm going with this. The NEPROS is heavier. So the Stahlwille, I think, is 75 grams. 75, and the NEPROS is 83, right? 88. So it's, you know, 13 grams heavier, and it's a more compact chunk, so it just feels kind of massive, right? Like this one's lighter, even though the head is bigger. So the handle in comparison feels really light. The place where you have the best grip, especially because it's flat-sided, that's where all the weight is, and then the handle swinging around isn't as annoying as this, even though it isn't far and it isn't swinging as far as this longer one. You can feel that weight swinging around more. I like the quick release in the NEPROS. This one feels a little fiddlier, but not annoying. You know, here I'll give you a comparison for the coke ends. The coke ends, you know, are light because the head is so tiny. Let's see. You know, 78. It's 3 grams heavier than the Stahlwille. For tools like this, specifically these tiny ones, we're holding them like this, right? So the head size I figured doesn't even matter, and a bigger head size could even be an advantage if the ergonomics are improved. It doesn't matter because your fingers are up here anyway. You've got your whole bulky hand in there. So if clearance is an issue around the head, you wouldn't be using this tool anyway. You'd be using one like this, where you have greater access, and you'd be using the lever action instead. As a bonus of this Stahlwille, though, it's got a nice grip here. So if you ever did come across a situation, there is that added tiny bit of versatility compared to this one. This one, right, about the head size, you could grip this with 2 fingers. Your thumb goes here. This one, the 2 fingers, you're kind of on this round section, and then your thumb's on the round section too, and it's so polished and slippery. You know, it doesn't really matter, but it's definitely not as good as this one. So a brief mention, you know, I thought about what are the snap-on options. They're kind of the only other ones remotely this size in this quality level. They have a super tiny one. I think it goes to about here. So I guess if you're doing specifically M6s, that might be fine. And there's no way it's heavier than this, but I don't actually know. You know, you would be subtracting this chunk on the end. They also make a flex head that I think is a tiny bit shorter than this. And I thought, what's the point of a flex head for that? But here, look at this video my friend sent me when he was telling me about it. the flex of the snap-on one isn't for greater maneuverability, but greater ergonomics. So it gives you a greater variety of interfaces with your hand. Anyway, because of that shorter length, it's not really a direct comparison, so don't feel bad about not including it here. So we've reached the conclusion of the wrenches, but I'll add some extra stuff just that I thought was interesting. So the first thing is, I like to use spinners for these. Spinners used to have no appeal to me until I moved into these smaller wrenches. The reason they're good on the smaller ones is you never choke up, right? So especially the Coke ends, you choke up a little, but on these tiny ones, you're always holding it like this, so it's always at your fingertips access. So if space isn't an issue and this extra height isn't an issue, why not have that? It definitely helps sometimes, like more than expected. You never have to reposition your hand to use this. It's just part of the whole experience, part of the tool always. But then I thought, and you know, I'll need a bigger one. I'll need a different one for this Stahlwille because the head's bigger than this than the Koken. This is a Koken branded spinner. But I thought if the ridge here was half the height and the extension was a little bit lower, that would be ideal. So I got this NEPROS. Looking at the pictures, it's flush here, and if it's flush there, that means they're kind of prioritizing the height. So it's a safe bet. And I know that the NEPROS are not significantly bigger than the Kokens. You know, a little significant, but they should be interchangeable. But when I got it, it is way different. It's massive. You know, it's much taller, and this is just solid metal, right? The result of that is it is much heavier. So here, this one is 15 grams. This one is 38, 35. So it's more than twice the weight. And on these light tools, you know, this was, what, 3 grams heavier than this? Guess we can just do this for comparison. Let's do that with the Stahlwille and the NEPROS with the NEPROS. So this unit is 89 grams. And what was this one? The whole thing was about 88. I mean, the thing without the spinner. So with that heavy spinner, it's 123. So it's more than 50% heavier, even though the wrench is smaller. Now, if you do have the spinner on it, the ergonomic disadvantage is less of an issue. You have that to stabilize, and it's almost, you know, it's bigger than it needs to be, which kind of helps that way. But, right, that's a significant difference. If you're in some awkward spot and it's slippery like this and it's heavy, it's probably not a problem, but definitely not ideal. The last thing I'll mention is the ratchet mechanisms. You know, you'd want the lowest drag, the smoothest mechanism that you can. And long story short, nothing touches the Kokens. So the Kokens are just vastly better than the rest. I take my ratchets apart and lubricate them, and when I get them, and that helps a lot. I've been using 1 drop of Super Lube, 1 drop of Tri-Flow, and a spritz of T9. So Super Lube's a common silicone lubricant. T9 has a Teflon additive, or Tri-Flow has a Teflon additive, and T9 is a Boeing product that's kind of like WD-40, but the lubricating properties are much better and the capillary effect properties are much better, so it's really good at seeping into little places. I don't know if it's my imagination, but that seems to help it kind of get in solution with the other lubricants, and it does make a difference. So this one's unlubricated straight from Koken, and you can listen compared to the lubricated one that I took apart. And we'll do a drag test in a minute. And then the Stahlwille and the NEPROS, when new, were really close. The Stahlwille maybe had a tiny bit more drag, and I lubricated this, so it's less now. And the NEPROS. So these still are really close. Let's take a measurement. So we'll go from lowest to highest drag. we'll start with the stock Koken. So what, 16, 15? Lubricated one. Like 12 or 13. And now check this out, the jump. And the Stahlwille and the NEPROS are both excellent. Compared to the 1/4 inch snap-on stuff I've used, it's better, but similar. So like 32. So that's like triple almost, or I forget what it was already, but a ton more. $43. So the Kokens are significantly less. Now, I don't think it really matters. These are all really good. And especially if you have a spinner on it, it's never going to be an issue. You can just hold the socket in place as you do the ratchet action. They're all really good. So that doesn't really matter, but an interesting detail. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. Leave a comment and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Thanks a lot. See ya.